So we're here to talk about the work and career of Lynda Benglis, whose career spans really since the late 1960s through to now, and we're sitting in an exhibition of her recent works, which, although are very contemporary and new in many of the ways in which they think through questions of form, they have a longer history, and there's a really strong connection to the kinds of questions that she has been asking of her materials, really since the late 60s, when she first began to work with quite extraordinary new materials. And although we think of her really as a sculptor, I think the origins of these works begin with the idea of liquidity and paint that connects her to that longer tradition of abstract expressionist painting. And this was really how she was first framed in the art press in New York in the late 60s. So she would take liquid latex and she would add pigment to it, and she would then do these really elegant pours directly on the floor. And as they would set in these really vivid Technicolor rainbows of puddles, she really challenged us to question what a painting is, what a sculpture is, what the edges or limits of a work might be, and what it means to enter a gallery. And critics at the time, I think, rightly recognised that this was some kind of comment on the longer history of abstract expressionism, connected very clearly and very funnily, I think, to the earlier photographs by Hansen and Muth of Jackson Pollock in his barn, pouring and hurling paint directly from the can. And I think this is a moment where we really start to think of Benglis as the important feminist artist that she is as well. These gestures that we can think of as a kind of witty retort to the machismo, the macho arena of abstract painting at this time. And if we juxtapose these images of Pollock at work and those of Benglis at work, there's some clear similarities, but also important differences. There's something very sort of erotic and tactile about her work, and she's been very clear about this from the beginning. She is interested in form and structure, but the language she uses is really much more sensual, and she talks about flesh, not form. She talks about the skeleton rather than the structure of the work. And I think this is a really powerful vocabulary she introduces to enable us to think in quite lively ways about the body in relation to the works that she makes. And it's so clear with the works where the question of the skeleton is clear, because these are works made from chicken wire and paper, and these really connect quite explicitly, I think, to the works she began to make in the late 60s and 70s that were wall-bound sculptures. So they were relief works. They sort of behave like paintings in that they're suspended on the wall, but they protrude into our space in a way that's very visceral and three-dimensional. But I think at the same time, by working with the chicken wire semi-open structures, these armatures, we can see the inside as well as the outside. And what's really striking when you see them in the flesh is the chicken wire presses through the paper, and it has an effect kind of like a snake skin. And they look like sort of a shed skin, or I think some of them with less colour, they look like kind of dried bones. There's something I do think very bodily about these works, even as they insist on their abstraction. And we see it in the really extraordinary bronze cast that's here too, the Power Tower, nestled here among the very delicate paperworks that have an air of precariousness to them. The sturdy solidity of this 1-ton bronze cast is really striking. And I think that although this is clearly a very monumental work, it does have some of the provisional twists and turns that we see in the paper pieces. The whole weight of the work looks as though it somehow slightly crushed itself. It looks like a giant balloon that's somehow deflating, or a tyre that's been blown out. And this idea of it recognising its own weight in that slight crumpling around the bottom, I think again is a slightly playful nod to the materials that she's chosen to work with. And what's exciting, I think, with a show like this is to be plunged straight back into the material world of her making, and to not think about its kind of art world politics, but to think, as she does increasingly, I think, about terms such as transformation, about the skin and the skeleton of the works, and to see that there's been this very strong formal language that's run through her works. They force you to move, and I think that the very best sculpture does that. At its base, its intention is to propel another body around its three-dimensional form, and whether it's on the wall or sat squat on the floor, as we see with the bronze cast, you can't really experience them passively. You have to move, you have to change your position in relation to the object. And I think these are all part of what it is to have a very physical and dynamic engagement with the sculpture that, again, keeps you moving.